Aaron had always been the quiet observer in any room, the type of man who preferred the steady cadence of thought over impulsive reaction. For years, this trait had served him well, first as an engineer, meticulously analyzing problems, and later as a devoted husband to Sarah, whose effervescence complemented his calm. They were the quintessential suburban couple, admired for their seemingly unshakable bond. But Aaron's world began to shift the evening he found Sarah's phone glowing on the kitchen counter. The screen flashed with a notification, a message from Mike, his best friend of nearly 15 years. It wasn't the message itself that caught his eye, but the timing. Sarah was in the shower, and the text seemed unusually casual. Looking forward to Friday. Can't wait to see you again. Something about it felt off, but Aaron brushed it aside, attributing his unease to overthinking. He told himself that Mike and Sarah often coordinated surprises or events. Yet, the seed of doubt had been planted. That night, as Sarah slipped into bed beside him, her auburn hair spilling over her pillow, Aaron noticed her reaching for her phone, her fingers hesitating before she set it back on the nightstand. It was subtle, but enough to make his pulse quicken. Ah. For the first time, Aaron felt a chasm between them. One he couldn't explain, let alone bridge. Over the following weeks, Aaron began noticing patterns that hadn't struck him before. Sarah had always been stylish, but now her wardrobe shifted. Sleek dresses and high heels for mundane errands, perfume lingering long after she returned. She had also become increasingly secretive with her phone, keeping it face down during meals and rushing to answer calls in hushed tones. Aaron's suspicions deepened one afternoon when Mike stopped by for their usual weekend basketball game. Aaron had invited a few neighbors over, as was customary, but Mike arrived early, his demeanor unusually tense. During a break, Aaron caught a fleeting glance exchanged between Sarah and Mike, a look too intimate for mere friendship. "Is everything all right?" Aaron asked Mike later as they grabbed water bottles from the cooler. Mike laughed, a little too loudly. "Yeah, man. Just work stress, you know." Aaron nodded, but his mind churned. Work stress didn't explain the way Mike avoided Sarah's gaze when Aaron was in the room, or the sudden silences that fell over their conversations. Late that night, unable to sleep, Aaron logged into their shared cloud account, where Sarah's phone automatically backed up her photos and messages. He scrolled cautiously, each swipe bringing him closer to answers he wasn't sure he wanted. Then he found it. A photo of Sarah and Mike, taken at a downtown cafe he didn't recognize. The timestamp confirmed it was during a weekend he had been away visiting his sister Emma. The picture told him everything. The laughter in their eyes, the familiarity in their posture, the betrayal hiding in plain sight. Now he knew. But what to do next? That would take all the patience and resolve he could muster. Aaron had always been a man of calculation, his calm demeanor masking an inner resolve forged through years of life's trials. Discovering Sarah's betrayal wasn't the breaking point. It was the catalyst. If he was to confront her and Mike, it had to be on his terms, with no room for denials or justifications. He needed proof, irrefutable and precise, not only to satisfy his own aching need for answers, but to ensure their betrayal would unravel on a public stage. And the next morning, Aaron called Emma, his younger sister and closest confidant. As a private investigator, she had the skills and discretion Aaron needed. "I hate to ask," Aaron said, his voice barely above a whisper, "but I need your help." Emma's voice was steady and supportive. "Tell me everything, Aaron. We'll handle this together." Within days, Emma had planted a discreet tracking device on Sarah's car and a camera in the garage, capturing her comings and goings. Emma also provided Aaron with software to recover deleted text messages and emails from Sarah's devices. The task felt invasive, but Aaron reminded himself that this wasn't just about him. This was about reclaiming the dignity they had stolen from him. Late one evening, Aaron sat in his study, the glow of his laptop illuminating his face. The recovered messages filled the screen, As he read through weeks of flirtations, secret plans, and admissions of feelings between Sarah and Mike, the confirmation he sought materialized with stark clarity. One message stood out. Mike had written, "Can't wait for our getaway. The cabin's ready, and it'll just be us this time. No distractions." Perrin's heart tightened. It wasn't just the betrayal of intimacy. It was the deceit layered with joy at his expense. He forwarded the messages to a secure folder, knowing they were the ammunition he needed for the confrontation to come. But Aaron didn't stop there. He needed corroboration, evidence beyond digital correspondence. Through Emma's surveillance, Aaron pieced together a timeline of their meetings, lunches that stretched well beyond an hour, unexplained overnight absences when Sarah claimed to be with friends, and a recurring pattern of trips to a secluded cabin 2 hours away. The pieces fell into place with cruel precision. Emma, ever meticulous, brought Aaron photos and videos, images of Sarah and Mike embracing outside the cabin, their laughter evidence even without sound. A video showed them arriving together, their casual familiarity revealing a bond far deeper than friendship. Aaron watched it all in silence, his face a mask of stoicism, though his chest burned with betrayal. Though the most damning piece came from a chance encounter involving Karen, a mutual friend who unknowingly confirmed Aaron's suspicions. Over coffee, Karen mentioned seeing Sarah and Mike at a boutique downtown. "I thought it was sweet how they were picking out a gift together," Karen said, her tone oblivious. Mike even joked that Aaron was going to love it. Aaron forced a smile, his mind searing with anger. Sarah had used his name as a shield for their duplicity, ensuring no one would suspect their bond. "Yeah," he said lightly. "She's good at surprises." That evening, Aaron reviewed the evidence once more. The clarity it offered was bitter and sharp, but it also gave him strength. He realized that betrayal wasn't just about their affair. It was about how they had weaponized his trust, treating his loyalty as a tool for their convenience. He began to plan, methodically and purposefully. Confronting Sarah and Mike directly in the heat of his anger would give them an out, a way to twist his emotions into a narrative of overreaction. Instead, Aaron decided on a calculated exposure, one that would strip them of the lies they had spun and lay bare the full extent of their betrayal. The final straw came one rainy evening, when Sarah claimed she was working late. Emma's surveillance showed her car parked outside Mike's townhouse. The video footage showed Sarah exiting hours later, disheveled and smiling, her arm brushing against Mike's as they shared a lingering goodbye. Aaron closed his laptop, the plan fully formed in his mind. He wouldn't just expose them. He would dismantle the facade they had built piece by piece, ensuring their betrayal echoed in the corners of their lives where they had felt safest. It wasn't vengeance that drove him. It was the pursuit of justice. They had underestimated him, assuming his love for them would shield their actions. Now they would learn the true weight of his loyalty. Now they would learn the true weight of his loyalty and what happened when it was betrayed. The day of reckoning arrived like a storm creeping on a still horizon, slow, deliberate, and inevitable. Aaron had spent weeks carefully preparing, his every step calculated to ensure Sarah and Mike's betrayal would unravel with maximum clarity and impact. His plan was set, and his resolve had hardened into something unbreakable. He wasn't just confronting fidelity, he was dismantling the lies that had woven themselves into the fabric of his life. It began with an unassuming email sent to Mike's employer. Aaron had discovered through the recovered messages that Mike's affair with Sarah extended to a misuse of company resources. Their cabin getaways, paid for under the guise of business retreats, had been funded by company accounts. Aaron compiled the evidence, email correspondences, receipts, and surveillance footage, then packaged it into an anonymous tip. It wasn't just about exposing the affair. It was about holding Mike accountable for the lies he had spun, far beyond their personal betrayal. That same morning, Aaron delivered copies of the damning photos and messages to Sarah's closest friend, Karen. Karen unwittingly had become a key player in his investigation, and Aaron knew she wouldn't keep quiet once the truth was in her hands. The betrayal would ripple outward, touching their entire social circle. By midday, Aaron set the final stage for the confrontation. Sarah had left the house early, claiming she needed to run errands, but Aaron knew better. Emma's surveillance confirmed she had gone to meet Mike at a cafe downtown. Aaron arrived 20 minutes later, slipping into a corner booth where he could observe them unnoticed. They sat close, their heads nearly touching as they spoke in hushed tones. Sarah's laughter rang out, light and carefree, and Aaron's chest tightened at the sight. For a moment, the years of their marriage flashed before his eyes. Wedding vows exchanged under an oak tree, late-night talks about their future, the quiet companionship they had shared for over a decade. It was all a mirage now, he reminded himself, a carefully constructed lie. Mike reached across the table, his hand brushing against Sarah's. She smiled at him, a smile Aaron once thought was meant only for him. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture, the final piece of evidence he needed. Aaron stood and approached their table, his steps deliberate and unhurried. He saw the moment Sarah noticed him. Her smile froze, her face paling as she leaned back instinctively. Mike's head turned, confusion quickly replaced by alarm. "Aaron," Sarah stammered, her voice laced with panic. "What are you doing here?" Aaron placed his phone on the table, the screen displaying the incriminating photo he had just taken. "I could ask you the same thing," he said, his tone calm but firm. The cafe seemed to quiet, nearby patrons sensing the tension radiating from the table. Sarah glanced at Mike, who looked like he wanted to disappear into his chair. "I think we should talk about this privately," she said, her voice trembling. Aaron's hazel eyes locked onto hers, unflinching. Mike shifted uncomfortably, clearing his throat. "Don't," Aaron interrupted, his voice like steel. "You don't get to explain. Not here, not now." Aaron turned to Sarah, his expression unreadable. "You should go home. We'll finish this conversation there." Without waiting for a response, he left the cafe, his heart pounding but his mind resolute. When Sarah arrived home, Aaron was waiting for her in the living room. A manila folder sat on the coffee table, its edges worn from handling. Sarah hesitated in the doorway, her usual confidence nowhere to be seen. Aaron gestured toward the couch. "Sit!" She obeyed, her hands ringing nervously in her lap. Aaron picked up the folder and opened it, pulling out the photographs, messages, and receipts he had meticulously collected. He placed them in front of her, one by one. Her mother had loved to hang these in her house. She didn't say a word. "You want to explain this?" he asked, his voice steady. Sarah's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the evidence. "Aaron, don't lie to me," he said sharply. "Not anymore." For a moment, silence filled the room, broken only by the sound of Sarah's shallow breaths. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. "It was a mistake." And Aaron's laugh was bitter. "A mistake is one time, Sarah. This is a pattern, a choice. Over and over, you chose him." Sarah buried her face in her hands, her sobs muffled. "I didn't want to hurt you. I didn't know how to stop." Aaron leaned forward, his voice low but unrelenting. "You didn't want to stop. Don't insult me by pretending this was out of your control." She looked up, her tear-streaked face pleading. "I still love you, Aaron. I don't want to lose you." Aaron stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Love doesn't look like this, Sarah. Love doesn't destroy the people it's supposed to protect." He stood, his decision clear. "I've already contacted a lawyer. We're done." Sarah's sobs grew louder, but Aaron turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her choices. As he stepped outside, the cool evening air wrapped around him, bringing a strange sense of relief. The storm had come and gone, and though the damage was immense, Aaron felt a glimmer of something he hadn't expected: freedom. For the first time in weeks, he felt like himself again. Aaron hadn't planned to revel in the fallout of Sarah and Mike's betrayal, but as the days unfolded, It became clear that his quiet vengeance would ripple far beyond their immediate circle. His actions weren't driven by malice, but by a need to reclaim his dignity and ensure they faced the consequences of their deceit. With the groundwork laid, he allowed the dominoes to fall where they may. The first call came 2 days after Aaron had presented Sarah with the evidence of her affair. It was Mike. Aaron recognized his number on the caller ID and hesitated before answering. Aaron, Mike began, his voice strained. We need to talk. Aaron's lips pressed into a thin line. We've talked enough. Please, Mike persisted. I made a mistake. I didn't want this to happen. Hey, the hell with your John. You didn't want it to happen, Aaron interrupted, his voice cold. Mike, you planned vacations with her. You sat at my dinner table, looked me in the eye, and lied to my face for months. Don't insult me with excuses. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I've been fired, Mike said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. Aaron felt a flicker of satisfaction, but kept his tone neutral. Maybe you should have thought about that before you used company funds to bankroll your affair. I'm picturing you peeing on somebody's counter objectively. They're saying I violated company policy, misused resources, Mike stammered. You sent them the evidence, didn't you? I'm not obligated to cover for you, Aaron said flatly. Don't call me again. Aaron ended the call and placed his phone down with finality. Mike's downfall was just one piece of the puzzle. His betrayal had far-reaching consequences, and Aaron wouldn't shield him from the repercussions. Meanwhile, Sarah's world was also beginning to unravel. One evening, Aaron returned home to find Sarah sitting at the dining table, her head in her hands. The confident, poised woman he had married now seemed hollow. Her red-rimmed eyes and trembling hands, a stark contrast to her usual self-assured demeanor. Karen told everyone, she said softly, not looking up. They know. Aaron leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. Did you expect her to keep your secrets? Sarah's shoulders sagged. I didn't think it would get this bad. People won't even look at me anymore. Aaron didn't reply, the weight of her words hanging in the air. She had built her life on appearances, and now those same appearances were crumbling, exposing the cracks she had worked so hard to conceal. You did this to yourself, Sarah, Aaron said finally, his voice devoid of sympathy. You can't expect to walk away from betrayal unscathed. Oh. The final act of Aaron's plan came during a dinner with their mutual friends. Aaron had debated whether to attend, but Emma encouraged him, knowing it would be an opportunity to reclaim his narrative. When he arrived, the room buzzed with the hum of conversations that paused briefly at his entrance. Heads turned, some faces sympathetic, others curious. Karen approached him, a glass of wine in hand, her expression serious. I didn't mean to stir things up, she said quietly, but people needed to know the truth. Aaron nodded, appreciating her candor. It's not your fault. The truth was bound to come out eventually. He said, look, I allow you to accomplish more in life than just living with us. As the evening progressed, the topic of Sarah and Mike arose naturally. Someone mentioned Mike's sudden departure from his job, while another alluded to Sarah's absence from social gatherings. Aaron listened silently, his calm demeanor masking the turmoil beneath. Finally, someone asked, Aaron, how are you holding up? He took a moment before responding. It hasn't been easy, he admitted. But I've realized that honesty and loyalty are what truly matter. When those are broken, there's no going back. The room fell silent, his words resonating deeply. Aaron didn't elaborate, allowing the weight of his statement to linger. He wasn't looking for pity or revenge, only understanding. By the end of the evening, Aaron felt a sense of closure. The people who mattered now saw him not as a victim, but as a man who had faced betrayal with dignity and strength. He didn't need to shout or point fingers. The truth spoke for itself. Back home, Aaron stood in the quiet of his living room, staring at the empty spaces that once felt full. The house no longer carried the warmth it once had, but Aaron felt a strange peace. He had done what he needed to do, not out of anger, but to ensure the lies didn't define him. The next day, he filed the divorce papers. The process would be lengthy, but Aaron felt ready. Each step forward was a step toward rebuilding his life, free from the weight of deception. As he packed a small bag for a weekend trip to visit Emma, Aaron allowed himself a rare smile. The storm had passed, and though the landscape of his life had changed, he was still standing, stronger, wiser, and ready to move on. The divorce proceedings were surprisingly uneventful. Sarah seemed to know there was no point in contesting the inevitable. Aaron had assembled a mountain of evidence that would have made any attempt at resistance futile. She agreed to the terms. He kept the house, the car, and the majority of their joint assets. All Sarah walked away with was her personal belongings and a hollow apology that came too late to matter. The day she moved out, Aaron watched from the doorway, his arms crossed and his expression unreadable. Her auburn hair was tied back, and her once vibrant energy was replaced with the subdued resignation. She paused at the threshold, glancing back at him. "I'm sorry, Aaron," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Aaron nodded but said nothing. The weight of her betrayal hung between them, too heavy for words to lift. Without another glance, Sarah stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Aaron stood there for a long moment, the silence of the empty house settling around him. It was strange, the absence of her presence. For so many years, their lives had been intertwined, every room in the house bearing some mark of their shared existence. Now, those memories felt like artifacts from a life that no longer belonged to him. In the weeks that followed, Aaron threw himself into work and rebuilding his routine. The house became a project, its every corner holding an opportunity to reclaim something for himself. He replaced the furniture in the living room, repainting the walls in a fresh, calming shade of blue. The bedroom was stripped of anything that reminded him of Sarah, transformed into a sanctuary of simplicity and quiet reflection. One evening, as he unpacked a new bookshelf, Emma dropped by with takeout and a bottle of wine. She'd been his rock throughout the ordeal, offering a steadying presence when the weight of everything felt unbearable. "Last summer, in the middle of the summer, we bought a house together in New York. You've done a good job with the place," Emma said, glancing around the freshly updated living room. "It looks lighter." "That was the idea," Aaron replied, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. They sat together, eating and reminiscing about childhood memories. Emma had a way of grounding him, reminding him of who he was before the chaos. As they laughed over an old story about a disastrous family camping trip, Aaron realized something he hadn't felt in months. A flicker of hope. Now, despite his efforts to rebuild, there were moments when the pain crept in. Late at night, when the house was quiet and the world outside seemed still, Aaron's thoughts would drift to Sarah. He didn't miss her. At least, not the version of her that had betrayed him. But he mourned the life they'd once built together. It was a strange grief, not for the loss of her, but for the loss of the person he thought she was. To combat those moments, Aaron began journaling, pouring his thoughts onto the page. At first, the words were jagged and raw, full of anger and confusion. But over time, they softened, reflecting not just his pain, but also his growth. Writing became a way for him to process, to untangle the web of emotions that had ensnared him. He also reconnected with old friends, people he'd drifted away from during his marriage. A hiking trip with a college buddy, a weekend woodworking class he'd always wanted to try. Each experience reminded him of the parts of himself that had been neglected. One Saturday morning, Aaron received an unexpected call from Karen. "There's a group of us going out for dinner tonight," she said. "You should come." Aaron hesitated. It had been months since he joined a social gathering, and he wasn't sure he was ready. But Karen's insistence won him over. And that evening, he found himself at a lively restaurant, surrounded by laughter and conversation. It was a strange but welcome change. People were warm, supportive, and kind. They didn't ask about Sarah or the divorce. They treated him as Aaron, not as a man recovering from betrayal. For the first time, he felt like himself again. At the end of the night, Karen pulled him aside. "You're doing great," she said with a smile. "I know it doesn't always feel like it, but you are." Aaron nodded, feeling the truth of her words settle in his chest. He still had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt the path ahead was his own to walk. Months later, Aaron stood on the porch of his home, looking out over the yard he'd spent the spring revitalizing. The air was warm, the sun dipping below the horizon in a blaze of gold and orange. He sipped his coffee, the evening quiet and peaceful. The pain of betrayal hadn't vanished, and rebuilt he had. The future wasn't something he feared anymore. It was something he welcomed.